As Sun Tzu once said, "To conquer the enemy without resorting to war is the most desirable. The highest form of generalship is to conquer the enemy by strategy." But who were these generals during World War II? We all know the familiar faces like Patton, Eisenhower, or Rommel, but there were many names that didn't make the history books. Here we have compiled a list of the top 5 underappreciated generals of WW2. So let's start with the number 5 on our list. Number 5. Field Marshal Sir William Slim. British Field Marshal William Slim was a rare man. In the class-conscious England of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, he rose from the rank of private to the highest rank in the British Army. Slim is number 5 on our list due to the peripheral nature of the campaign in which he fought, Burma. The Burmese campaign was primarily a British imperial affair. Burma was the gateway to India, the crown jewel of British colonies. Fighting and defeating the Japanese on their drive towards India in 1944 was vital for Britain to retain control of their valuable territory. India was not only rich in the resources and manpower Great Britain needed to win the war, but the main effort to supply the Chinese in their fight for survival against the Japanese was based in India. William Slim fought on the front lines of WW1 and in many theaters of that war, France, Gallipoli, and the Middle East. He was wounded twice and twice commended for bravery. Slim was stationed in India between the wars and became familiar with the British officers there. He also learned much about the Indian armed forces, which at the time included men from present-day Pakistan and Bangladesh. Over 2 million Indian men served in the British armed forces in WW2 in almost every theater of war. When WW2 began, Slim was in France and was crucial to the safe retreat to Dunkirk and back to England. He then fought in East Africa, commanding a force that helped drive the Italians from the area. In 1942, he was sent to Asia to stop the Japanese approach towards India through Burma's thick, forbidding jungles. The British were being driven back towards the Indian border when Slim arrived. He was instrumental in stopping the Japanese before they reached the Indian border. However, the British counteroffensive which followed was a disaster, as Slim had said it would be when he protested against it. The officer in command of that offensive was relieved of command, and Slim took his place. During the next few months, he reformed, reinforced, and trained his men without let-up. He instructed them in infiltration tactics, the business of air resupply, and how to defend a surrounded position, for he intended his army to fight behind enemy lines and cut off Japanese supplies. As a result, he kept the Japanese on the run for almost a year. In 1944, the Japanese High Command realized that the supplies coming to China from India prevented their victory in mainland Asia, so they determined to stop them with a massive offensive aimed at cutting the Himalayan supply route and inciting the Indians to revolt against the British. In their way was William Slim and the 14th Army. In the key, brutal battles of Imphal and Kohima on the Indian border, the British Imperial Army defeated the last Japanese attempt to reach India through stout defense and maneuver. Number 4. Tomoyuki Yamashita. Japanese General Yamashita did not fight in Burma, but still he did fight just next door, devising and leading a brilliant campaign to defeat the British in their colonies of Malaya and Singapore. Yamashita was recognized as an extraordinarily gifted man from a young age. He attended the Army Academy, Japan's equivalent of West Point or Sandhurst, and he rose quickly through the ranks. After graduating in 1916, he joined the ranks of the Army General Staff, the command center of the Japanese Army, and politically very influential. Yamashita was especially outspoken for a Japanese officer. In the 1930s, his opposition to the Japanese invasion of China and its provocation of the United States caused Yamashita to be assigned overseas, far from Japan where things were happening. Yamashita was also unpopular with the top general and later, 1944, Prime Minister of Japan, Hideki Tojo. Yamashita insisted that Japan needed to continue developing their tanks and increase their number, which Tojo rejected, to the detriment of the Japanese war effort. Despite his unpopularity, Yamashita's ability was highly regarded. In the late fall, early winter 1941-42, he was given command of the armies assigned to conquer Malaya and Singapore. One of the problems facing Yamashita was that the British forces outnumbered his force by more than 2 to 1. To overcome that problem, Yamashita used tactics that would have been recognizable to the German generals on the other side of the world, except that Yamashita's troops used quick marching and bicycles to outmaneuver the British, whose generals were outmatched and who had greatly underestimated the Japanese. After outmaneuvering the British and conquering Malaya, Yamashita was faced with the assignment of taking control of Singapore, which was regarded as impregnable by the British. Unfortunately, there were weaknesses in the British defenses, which were spotted and taken advantage of by Yamashita and his men. Within days, the island colony was in Japanese hands. Shortly thereafter, Yamashita's pugnacious face was plastered all over the world in pictures of him demanding the official surrender of the colony from the British commander. Yamashita was then sent to China to fight, but was appointed Japanese military governor of the Philippines shortly before the American invasion of their former colony. Yamashita was completely outgunned, outnumbered, and without resupply, but his long delaying action into the mountains of the Philippines kept tens of thousands of U.S. troops pinned down in the islands, rather than moving towards Japan itself. However, Yamashita's military reputation was forever stained by the behavior of his troops, especially in the Philippines in 1944. Rape, murder, and torture were commonplace. Tomoyuki Yamashita paid for this with his life in 1946, having been found guilty of war crimes by an international tribunal. Number 3. Smiling Albert Kesselring. The nickname Smiling Albert was given to German General and later Field Marshal Albert Kesselring to the Allied troops fighting against him. It was meant as an insult and implied that the German was a little simple. At the same time, the name was given to him out of respect. There are much worse names he could have been given, but due to his treatment of British and American prisoners of war and the way he fought, he ended the war being highly regarded by his former enemies. Of course, no German called Kesselring Smiling Albert. They called him Uncle Albert, for they knew he cared about them and their troubles, for he had seen action in the trenches of World War I. After World War I, Kesselring was involved in the German army's efforts to reform and rearm itself. He was also one of the major players in the effort to secretly rebuild the German Air Force, or Luftwaffe, in the Soviet Union. The Versailles Treaty, which ended World War I, forbade Germany from possessing even one fighter or bomber. Kesselring was involuntarily transferred to the Luftwaffe at the request of Hermann Göring, its commander. Göring had a high opinion of Kesselring's organizational abilities and put him in command of an air fleet that dominated Poland's skies in 1939. In 1940, Kesselring had an important command during the Battle of Britain. In addition, he made himself more popular with his men by learning to fly, which he did almost every day for the rest of the war. Kesselring remained in the Air Force, but was placed in command of ground troops alongside the famous Erwin Rommel in the last half of the North African campaign. When defeat was imminent, Hitler recalled his favorite general, Rommel, back to Germany to avoid disgrace and to plan for the defense of the Channel coast. It was left to Kesselring to either try to salvage victory in North Africa, or at least retreat in an orderly and combative fashion to buy time for German armies elsewhere. Kesselring's forces were outmatched in every way except combat experience when the Americans invaded western North Africa. The Allies slowly squeezed the Germans into the far north of Tunisia. Unfortunately for the Allies, they did not count on Kesselring's skill in both defense and organization. As a result, the majority of the German army trapped in Tunisia were successfully evacuated under the noses of Allied planes and ships. Most of these troops were sent to the Italian island of Sicily, where the Allies were expected to strike next, which is precisely what they did in July 1943. Once again, Kesselring fought an orderly withdrawal to the north of the island, causing the Allies to fight much longer than their timetable had planned. Furthermore, with defeat imminent, Kesselring and his staff organized another retreat, this time across the narrow straits of Messina to mainland Italy. Again, this was done despite Allied supremacy in the air. Kesselring made his name in Italy.
From the toe and heel of that famously boot-shaped country to its northern quarter, Kesselring and his men built some of the most formidable defensive lines of the war, only retreating when their positions were untenable to one more powerful defensive belt and one more and one more. Virtually every inch of ground gained in Italy by the Allies was contested bitterly, and when the war ended, they still had not come close to their goal of entering Germany through the south. Kesselring surrendered his army a week before the official surrender of Germany on May 8, 1945. He and all his men knew the end was near, and there was no point in carrying on. It would only cause more men to die for nothing. That decision and the humane treatment given to Allied prisoners under his command probably saved Kesselring's life after the war. He was put on trial for war crimes he knew about and likely encouraged against Italian partisans in the latter part of the war.
He was sentenced to death by an Italian court, but political pressure from the British and Winston Churchill caused his sentence to be commuted to 21 years. He was released in 1952 due to ill health but lived until 1960.
that's a short stack of music videos that listens to different sounds and makes interpretations of what you sound like. Is it very accurate?